Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Melanie White, President of the Women's Club. Welcome to our members that are here in the auditorium, and welcome to our members viewing online. We're so glad that you're here because we could not do this if we didn't have you, each one of you, coming to participate in our Monday programs. Thank you for being here. Following today's program, please join us in the Halsey Hall to meet Dr. Brian Carpenter. There are so many wonderful opportunities coming up to connect with the Women's Club. Each Wednesday through November 26th from 10 a.m. to noon, the Women's Club Library is open to members on the second floor of the Bowling Haxel House. Remember, our catalog is available via the library tab in the members area of our website. I'm always so proud of our library because it was one of the original missions of the Women's Club. So please get to the library and enjoy what it has to offer. Make Your Own Holiday Wreath is scheduled for November 15th from 3 to 5 p.m. Registration deadline for this is November 8th. The holiday reception is coming up. Can you believe that? Better get shopping. December 8th from 1 to 3 p.m. Is our holiday reception. It's going to be right here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and the registration deadline is December 1st. Thank you to the Special Events Committee for providing our refreshments today. Thanks you to Priscilla Cash for serving as chair of the day. Please silence your cell phones. Priscilla will now introduce Dr. Brian Carpenter.
So good afternoon, and on behalf of the program committee, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. If you take a look at the US population today, more than 103 million Americans are age 55 and older. That is the fastest growing age group in the entire country, and we've been hearing for a long time about how this group will impact the reshaping of families, workplaces, communities in ways that we're only beginning to understand. We are joined today by Dr. Brian Carpenter, a clinical psychologist and professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Washington University in St. Louis, where he also serves as co-director of the Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging. He earned his bachelor's degree from Williams College and his doctorate in clinical psychology from Case Western Reserve University, followed by postdoctoral fellowships at the Philadelphia Geriatric Center, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Portland VA healthcare system. Dr. Carpenter's career has been devoted to understanding what it truly means to age well, not just to live longer, but to live healthier and more meaningfully. His research and clinical work explore how older adults, their families, and healthcare providers communicate and make decisions together through some of life's most complex stages. What makes his work especially optimistic is this: Dr. Carpenter examines how the way we think about aging actually shapes the way we experience it. The science is clear. People who hold a positive mindset about aging live longer and healthier than those who don't. And the best news in all of this is that our mindset isn't fixed. The way we view aging, our own and others, can evolve. And when it does, our health, our relationships, and even our sense of purpose can grow stronger right along with it. So today, Dr. Carpenter is here to help us rethink what it means to grow older, to see aging not as something to fear, but as something to understand, embrace, and even shape. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Brian Carpenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. They've given me a fancy microphone that I'm going to use that lets me walk among you, Oprah style. How is the sound in the back? Good? Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm here today. Apparently, I am the expert in the room about aging. Looking out into the room, and I'm not really sure that's entirely the case, but I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation from the Women's Center here, the Women's here in Richmond, to talk with you a little bit this afternoon about the topic that I've devoted my career to. I'm not necessarily sure I'm going to have anything that's groundbreaking to talk to you about today, but I hope by the end of today, you will be thinking a little bit differently about what it means to be an older person and what it means to be growing older in our society. To some extent, we have all become experts in aging because we've been doing it for a very long time. We started doing it from the moment that we were born, and we will continue to do that until the moment we die. So in some ways, we're all very, very familiar with aging. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the later phase of life. And so perhaps one way to start the conversation is to ask the question, at what age does a person become old? And there was a survey that was conducted just this year, a multinational survey that surveyed over 25,000 people. And the results of this survey suggested that most people thought that individuals become old at age 66. 66. But when you look at the age of the people who answered that question, you see an interesting trend in their responses. That yes, it's the 20-year-olds who thought that 60 seemed old, but when you ask a 70-year-old what's old, it's not 60 anymore. And that number is a little bit of a moving target when it comes to how people think about growing older. Well, what about this number? Does 100 seem old to you? Does that seem old? Well, there are many people who have even surpassed that age. Does anyone know who is the oldest person alive on the planet right now, how old they are? Because they're older than 100. It's this woman. She's 116 years old. 116. She was born in 1909. But even she is not the person who's lived the longest. Does anyone know how old the longest lived person on record lived to be? Very, very close. Very, very close. It's this woman from France. She lived to be over 122 years old. 120. That's old. That's we can probably agree that's old, right? Mm-hmm. But people who are 122, 116, 112, they are not going to be unusual in our society any longer. In fact, the fastest growing age group in the world are the centenarians, the people over age 100. Does anybody remember the Today Show when what was his name? Willard Scott. Willard Scott would come on the show and he would highlight somebody was turning 100. They can't do that anymore because there are so many people turning 100 every day. Every day. Remarkable transformation in our society. If you look at the list of the longest lived people, there's a lot of people who've lived way beyond 100. Does anyone notice anything else about the people on this list? You, sir, in the third row, yes. You feel it? Do you feel my pain? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Women do tend to outlive men for, we think, a variety of reasons, some biological. There may be some endocrinological benefit in terms of hormones that females have that men don't have. But of course, the picture is probably much more complicated than that. There are psychological and social reasons behind these numbers as well. So we've got a little ways to go to catch up to the women. And in fact, if you look down this list, you have to go pretty far to find a man on this list, somewhere down to number 27, as a matter of fact. So we're learning more about that. When I started this career studying aging, we talked about old people as if they were a monolithic group. There was this big mass of people who were the old people out there. But even in the time that I've done my research, we've had to come up with new terminology. And so now when we talk about the 65 to 75-year-olds, they're the young old. And we also have old, 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 and the oldest old. And that makes sense because the challenges, the needs, the opportunities that are faced by somebody who is 65 are very different than the ones that are faced by somebody who is 75 or 85 or 105 or 115. And so even in my field, we've had to adjust our thinking quite a bit over the last 10 or 20 years to take into account the fact that there's a great deal of diversity even within this one segment of our population. We've experienced a remarkable transformation in our population here in the United States over the last 100 years or so. And this is a graph that shows the percentage of the US population over age 65. And it's a remarkable, remarkable change in our population in the last 100 years. We started out in 1900, only 4% of the population was over age 65. But look where we are in 2025, and look where we're going by the end of the next century. In 2030, we will be close to a point where 1 in 5 people in the United States will be over age 65. That's the year in 2030 when all of the baby boomers will turn age 65 or older. And then in 2034, we will face another hallmark of a sort. In 2034, demographers predict that for the first time in human history, there will be more people over age 65 in the United States than there are under age 18. More old people than children for the first time in our history. Never happened before in human history. And that's the result of some pretty dramatic things that we should be proud of. We have increased our life expectancy over the last 100 years so that most of us can anticipate living till fairly late in life. Back in 1900, the average life expectancy was only 47 years old. But we're around age 78 now for people who are born now in 2025. That's a remarkable achievement due to advances in public health, education, medical breakthroughs, incredible achievement that we should be proud of. But what it means is that the society that we all live in and the society we will continue to live in will look very, very different than the society that we lived in 100 years ago. And that has consequences for all of us and our society. If you live to age 65 now and you're a male, you can anticipate living another 20 years or so, and even longer if you're female. Again, remarkable transformation. Let me show you this transformation in a different way. Demographers use a fancy graph like this called a population pyramid to show what your population looks like. And let me tell you a little bit about how to interpret these population pyramids. They show the population of your country along the bottom. They show the number of people in different age groups along the left. They show a snapshot of your population at a certain point in time. And they show the number of men on the left and the number of women on the right. And now I'm going to put this population pyramid into motion. I think I am. Here we go. And you can watch the population change. You can see the baby boomers show up. Here they are. They're that blip there, that big change in our population. And now the graph will move into some population projections into the future. I'll let it play once more so you can see this change in our population is dramatic. There the baby boomers show up, and there they are moving through the lifespan. Now you'll notice a couple of key features that are changing in the population pyramid. One is that our population overall is growing. We have more people than we did before. But the other dramatic change in the population pyramid is in its shape. It used to be a pyramidal shape. It used to be a population pyramid. It's become a population rectangle. And what that means is the baby boomers were unusual. They changed the population in a dramatic way, but they're not unusual anymore. That the baby boomers were the first of an ongoing set of generations that will mean that we have an older population forever and ever and ever, as far as we can tell. Has anybody ever been to Florida before? If you've been to Florida and you look around and you see who's living in Florida, all of the United States is going to look like Florida in the next 10 years. In the next 10 years. And we are behind the curve here in the United States. If you look at countries like Japan, countries like Italy, and other Western European nations, they're way ahead of us in terms of their population aging. In Japan, right now, 1 out of every 3 people is over age 65. 1 out of every 3 people is over age 65. So we are paying very close attention to countries like Japan, Italy, Germany, because they are trying new experiments, they are trying new things, trying new ways of being and living to address that change in their population. And we're watching them closely because we're going to be where they are now in a short amount of time. Some people see this as all doom and gloom, but I don't, because I think there's a tremendous opportunity here to take advantage of the expertise, the experience, the wisdom, the caring, the compassion that older adults bring with them into this later phase of life. But in order to do that, we need to make some changes, both individual and societal. Because it's not just the goal to live longer. We want to live longer better, longer healthier. And we can do that by making some own choices ourselves, but we also need the help of the larger culture around us to make our later life as good as it possibly can be. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time with that as a foundation, talking a little bit about what we've learned from a scientific point of view about the biology of aging, the psychology of aging, and some of the social facets of aging. And I'll be talking a little bit about what we've learned about what we can all do as individuals to promote our healthy aging, but also how we need to start thinking about aging in our society and how we need to start changing our society if we want to maximize the later years of our lives. So let's begin by talking a little bit about the biology of aging. This is a universal process. It happens to all of us. It happens to all of us in every system within our bodies. And you know this. If you look at yourself in the mirror, you know this. The body that you have now is not the same body you had before. And this is a natural process. Scientists who study the biology of aging refer to one element of our aging as primary aging, that there are things happening to our bodies at the cellular level, at the level of our tissues, at the level of our organs. And these are changes that are happening to every living organism. They're not necessarily a sign of disease. They're a normal part of what happens to an organism as it grows older. What we experience, however, tend to be the secondary consequences of primary aging. Those changes to our cells, those changes to our tissues, those changes to our bodies, they show up in these kinds of manifestations. Chronic conditions, changes in our physical functioning, changes in our mobility, changes in our strength, changes in our muscle strength. All of those changes are the result of primary aging. Traditionally, scientists have focused on the secondary causes of aging, the consequences, to figure out how we can improve quality of life. But an exciting new field of science has emerged in the last few decades called geroscience. And geroscience is actually taking a slightly different approach to this kind of science. And rather than concentrating on your heart, or your lungs, or your skin, or your kidneys, or your bones, geroscience tries to figure out, is there some foundational change that's happening to primary aging? And if we can understand that, maybe that would unlock the key to help us understand how to prevent secondary aging. So there's some science emerging now that suggests that we may be able to learn something about the primary course of aging that helps us forestall or maybe even prevent some of the secondary changes associated with aging. Let me give you one example. There is good science that's emerging to suggest that caloric restriction may have important benefits for healthy aging. And here's an example of what that research might look like. There are two monkeys, approximately the same chronological age that you can see here. And the monkey on the left was given a calorically restricted diet. And the monkey on the right was given a normal diet. And when you look at the monkey on the left, in terms of its biology of aging, it looks and acts a lot younger than the monkey on the right. What we're talking about is reducing this monkey's calories by about 1/3 a day, still providing all the nutrients that it needs, but reducing caloric intake. Scientists believe that there is something going on with metabolism that undergirds some of that primary aging phenomena. And by reducing caloric intake, we can reduce the negative effects of metabolism and inflammation. Compelling science has been replicated. There are studies going on around the world that look at caloric restriction, including studies in human beings. So this is an example of the kind of research that might reveal something important about primary aging that helps us understand how to improve secondary aging. When we look at the factors that contribute to disease as people grow older and premature death that people experience, there are certainly a powerful influence of genes. About 1/3 of our health, scientists think that we can attribute to the genetic material that we inherited from our parents. But you'll also notice on this graph that there are many other features of life, domains of life, that have an even stronger influence on whether we're living a long, healthy life. And what I think is optimistic about this is that these are things we can do something about. We have the ability, if we have the will, to change some of these things. And I think that's what's exciting about the science of aging right now, is that we know that genetics is not destiny, that we all should feel empowered to think about the choices that we make in our individual lives, the communities that we live in, and the policies and programs that we develop, because all of them could have a very powerful influence on the health of ourselves as we grow older. So that's a good story, I think, about the biology of aging and where it's headed and what we're learning. Let me turn now to the psychology of aging. I'm a psychologist by training. We spend a lot of time thinking about cognition, intellectual features, characteristics, abilities that we use our brain to do in our mind. And this is a list of some of the examples of the kinds of intellectual skills that we're thinking about when we're studying cognition in aging. What we've learned is that this set of intellectual skills doesn't do the same thing as we grow older. And there may, in fact, be two different buckets of cognitive skills. One bucket of skills called the fluid intelligences, and another bucket of skills called the crystallized intelligences. And what's different about these is that we believe that the fluid intelligences tend to go down as we grow older, but the crystallized intelligences, they have the potential to get better as we grow older. And let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. This is the general trend that we see in the scientific literature around changes in fluid intelligences. Fluid intelligences, those are the ones that require a really good, efficient, quick brain. Memory, attention, concentration, speed of processing. They require a brain that's well-wired, well-connected, and efficient. That's going to go down as you grow older because the brain that you have when you're 70 is not the same brain you had when you were 20. The wiring just isn't as efficient. Just like your kidney when you were 80 isn't the same as your kidney when you were 20. The skin that you had when you were 80 isn't the same skin you had when you were 20. The brain is undergoing changes the longer that we live, and one of the natural outcomes of those changes is a reduction in fluid intelligences. Let me give you a real-life example of what that might look like. One way we test fluid intelligences in the laboratory is with a task that's called the Stroop task. I'm going to show you the Stroop task right now, and you can test your own fluid intelligence. I'm going to flash some words on the screen, and all you need to do is silently read the word to yourself, okay? All right, how'd you do? That's pretty easy, right? You can read those, and when we test older adults in the laboratory and younger adults in the laboratory, and we show them the Stroop task, older adults and younger adults are just as accurate at identifying those words, and they're just as quick at reading those words, okay? So easy. No differences between old people and young people on that version of the Stroop task. All right, now I'm going to mix it up and make it a little bit harder for you. I'm going to show you another version of the Stroop task. This is the Stroop task with interference, and you'll understand why its word interference is in there next. I'm going to show you another list of words, but this time, rather than reading the words, I want you to say to yourself the color the word is printed in. The color the word is printed in. All right? Give this a try. Oh, yeah, that's a lot harder, isn't it? That's the interference that I was talking about. The Stroop task with interference asks you to inhibit an automatic cognitive process, and it asks you to inhibit reading. And reading is a process that we have a hard time inhibiting. We can't stop ourselves from reading because we learn to do it at a very young age. We spend a lot of our lives doing it. So it's hard to stop yourself from doing that. And when we compare the performance of older adults and younger adults on the Stroop task with interference, this is a lot harder for older people than it is for younger people, because this task requires you to inhibit that automatic process, and it requires a brain that's super efficient and super well-wired. And your brain is not the same brain you had when you were older as when you were younger. Being challenged by the Stroop task with interference is not a sign that anything is wrong with your brain. It's simply a sign that your brain you have has grown older, okay? But this is an example of how we might be able to document changes in fluid intelligence. But remember, I also said that there was another group of intelligences, cognitive skills, that we think has the potential to get better, and those are the crystallized intelligences. These are the things that get better with practice. These are the things that get better with more education. These are the things that get better with more experience. And what do older adults have? They have more experience, and they have more practice, or can have more practice. So we're optimistic about the crystallized intelligences and being able to use those to offset some of the changes that are naturally going to occur in the fluid intelligences. So let me give you a test of your crystallized intelligence next, okay? You may have seen these kind of reasoning tasks before. There are 4 shapes here. one of the shapes along the bottom can be placed up in the upper right-hand corner to complete this pattern. Raise your hand when you know which one of the shapes at the bottom completes the pattern. Oh, yes, that was quick. Right there, yes. Do you mind telling us which one? The third one? This one right here? And that's the correct answer. Can you explain why that's the correct answer? Tell me more. Angle points? Mm-hmm.
You've got, in the triangle, you've got 3 points, you've got 3 dots. In a square, you've got 4 points and 4 dots.
Right on the money, 100%. A plus, right there, yep. Mm-hmm. You got 3 points or 3 sides, so therefore you've got 3 dots. You've got 4 points or 4 sides, you've got 4 dots. Okay, great. Let me make it a little bit harder for you. Let's try this one. One of those shapes along the bottom can complete the sequence in the top. Raise your hand when you've got it. Oh, maybe you didn't hear me. I said raise your hand when you've got it. The last one, can you explain why?
It has an oval and a diamond.
You got it right.
Okay.
Say it again.
It has an oval and a diamond.
That's, okay, keep going.
Ones that are out, and it's the only one that's completely different from the first.
Okay, you're giving me a lot of possible answers, none of which are correct, but keep talking. Keep talking.
I tried to bring it out because
Yeah.
I saw that it was the one, but I can't explain to
Yep.
you why I think that.
Yeah, okay, she's trying. Let's give her a round of applause because she's trying. Mhm. So this is harder. This is definitely harder, and you're kind of not really close, but the number of dots is the same as the number of line intersections. You were going to say that next, right? You were going to say that next. I know you were going to say that next, yeah. So this is an example of the kind of reasoning task that when we give older adults plenty of time, plenty of practice, we let them do lots of these kinds of tasks, they get better at it, and in fact, their performance is equivalent to the performance of younger people, and sometimes even can surpass the performance of younger people. So this is another positive story about aging, that yes, there is decline, yes, that's the realistic change because of our brain, but there are things that we can do to offset some of those changes. What people are really worried about when they're thinking about cognition and aging are these kinds of things. They're really worried about dementia. And dementia is the umbrella term that we use to describe a whole set of disorders that can cause changes in a person's memory or thinking. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia. It probably accounts for somewhere around 2/3 of all of the causes of dementia. And this is what people are very worried about. And they have every right to be worried about it because Alzheimer's disease is age-related, which means that the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease goes up as we grow older. So that by the time we reach age 85, 33% of the population may be at risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. And if you've known anybody with Alzheimer's disease, this is a horrible, horrible, horrible disease. And scientists are working very hard to understand it and see if we can make some dents in prevention and cure. We're a fair ways off from my reading of the science at this point. So this is something that we definitely need to be concerned about. I want to point out something that I think is important in this statistic, though, is that yes, it's true that by the time we reach 85, about 1/3 of people may be at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. But flip that statistic on its head, and what that tells you is that by age 85, 2/3 of people do not have Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a disease. Like kidney disease or like heart disease, it is not a normal part of aging, and most people will not get it. Most people will not develop it. And I'm emphasizing this point here because I hear all the time people ask me about their memory and whether they should be worried about they couldn't remember where they put their car keys. Is that the first sign of Alzheimer's disease? For most people, no. That is your brain because you've grown older. But people are worried about Alzheimer's disease, and that worry can be damaging. That worry can be damaging to your brain. So I think we need to do a little bit better at educating people about the reality of diseases like Alzheimer's, because it is not inevitable that people will get Alzheimer's disease as they grow older. And we need to fight stereotypes and misconceptions about that. So what are some of the keys to cognitive preservation? How do we keep our brain sharp? How do we keep our memory and thinking doing what it needs to do? One is to guarantee that we've gotten as much formal education as possible when we were younger. Because when we're in school, when we're younger, our brain is growing and building, and we want to try to build the strongest, most efficient, most redundant wiring system possible. So that by the time we get to be 80, and things start to deteriorate, because they will, right? As I said before, your 80-year-old brain isn't the same as it was when you were 20. If you have a really strong, redundantly wired brain at 80, you're not going to notice it when some of those neurons start to die. And this is a critical time in life for building that strong brain. But there are still things people can be doing even after that phase of life. Creating for yourself a high complexity occupation where your brain is pressed, pushed all the time. This helps build a strong, redundant brain. Taking care of your cardiovascular health helps protect your brain throughout your lifespan. What's good for your heart is good for your brain. If you're taking good care of your heart, you're taking good care of your brain. We've actually seen a reduction in the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in the last few years. And the reason why scientists think we've accomplished that is not because of anything magical we've learned about Alzheimer's disease. It's because we are more aggressive at treating hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and other cardiovascular risk factors. That when you take good care of your heart, you're going to take good care of your brain, and that's going to reduce the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease. Another facet is social engagement. We've come to understand that being involved in people, doing what you're doing right here, doing what the Women's Club does, yes, is an important part of cognitive preservation. That there are important things going on within your brain when you are connected to other human beings. That's important. And the last piece of advice, marry somebody who's smarter than you are. It's kind of like when you're playing tennis. You want to play tennis with somebody who's a little bit better than you are, because they're going to lift your game up. And that's what a smart spouse will do for you cognitively. Okay, so positive story about the biology of aging, positive story about the psychology of aging. Let's turn to this third leg of the stool, the social aspects of aging. I already talked about social engagement and how important that is. You may remember a couple of years ago when the U.S. Surgeon General issued this report about warning us about loneliness and isolation in the population. They weren't talking about older adults in particular, but it certainly resonates for older adults. When we look, for example, at the percentage of older adults who say they feel isolated over time, we see a trend that looks like this. A fairly significant proportion of people even before the pandemic. Maybe not surprising that we took a little bit of a hit during the pandemic, more people feeling alone and isolated, but those numbers have started to trend down again. But they're not zero. They're not zero. And so this is another facet of our life in late life that we need to pay attention to, because that is an unacceptable number of older people who feel isolated and alone. And as a society, we need to be paying attention to who those people are and how to help them, because we know that this is not a good experience for them to be in. In fact, when you look at the subtitle of the Surgeon General's report, it was about the benefits, the healing effects of social connection and community. And that's where we need to go with programs, policies, and public health moving forward, is how to enhance social connections and engagements. The science is very clear about this. This was a review study that came out several years ago that pointed out some of the powerful biological benefits of being in relationship, of being connected, of having a community, of being social. These are powerful effects that are not just in our minds, they are in our bodies as well. You know that your mind is connected to your body. This science tells us that very, very clearly. We need to be turning this science into practice and making sure that we bring these benefits to the widest number of people as possible. I worry about that a little bit for one of the reasons that I already alluded to. These are statistics that talk about marital status. Here are the statistics for men across three different age categories. Alarming statistics, because if you make it to age 85 and you're a man, nearly half of those people are widowed, don't have their partner anymore. I'm going to hear a gasp when I show you these statistics for the women. I already told you earlier that women outlive men. Yay, congratulations. But this is one consequence of that more women will be without a partner the longer that they are alive. So social connection, community, having a group of people who care about you and will look after you, that's very important for everybody. It's going to be very important for women and maybe more challenging for women than even it is for men. So we need to be thinking about how we nurture our friendships. I need to replace this picture because now I've come to understand I don't like this picture so much. Why don't I like this picture? Anybody got a guess? They're all older. They're all older. And what a really vibrant, useful, social network looks like is one that is age diverse. It's age diverse. You don't want to be friends with people who are all the same age as you are because you're all going to die at the same time. And once your older friends start to get sick and die, you need to replace them with younger friends. So when I do talks like this to community agencies and organizations, I'm often challenging them to think about how could you bring more intergenerational programming to your organization? Because you're all wonderful people and you care about each other, but I want there to be like 50-year-olds in the audience, 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds in the audience, because those are the people who are going to look after you as you move forward in life. We also have come to understand the importance of faith communities. Science is very clear about this as well. Powerful opportunity for social engagement and connection. Turns out it probably doesn't mean doesn't matter what faith community you're part of. The magic here probably is about the community, not necessarily about the faith. Not to diminish the importance of the faith, but those two come in hand in these faith communities. So this is another important resource that we should be thinking about nurturing for older adults. Pets? Pets? These are social connections. You know, maybe put quotation marks around social, but these connections really matter. I'm not sure anybody has a pet chicken, but I think a pet chicken would just do the same good stuff to you that a pet dog would do. And of course, we're moving into a new era now, very rapidly, where AI, robots, they're not just on the horizon, they are in people's living rooms already. And I think this is technology that is sometimes progressing faster than the science is at this point, because we live in an entrepreneurial society. But I think that there's some real potential here to reduce social isolation and loneliness, and maybe even give practical support to older adults who need that help through this kind of technology assistance. Jury's still out. We'll see where it goes. We're all watching it very carefully, but don't rule it out yet. Don't be too pessimistic. There could be something positive here. But I said earlier that the social network is important, and I mean that locally, like your social network, but I also want us to think more broadly about the culture in which we live in. And I want to tell you a story. This is a story that begins back at the end of World War II, when many veterans were coming back to the United States. There was a housing shortage at the time, so the US government stepped in and tried to make housing more available for a larger number of people. And one of the consequences of that is that we created the suburbs after World War II. That a large percentage of the US population moved out of the traditional urban areas, and we created these neighborhoods, these communities that did a really important thing for our country at that time. It created housing opportunities and communities in new places for our growing population. What's discouraging or unfortunate about that is that this was a change in our community that served its purpose back then, but it may not be serving the purpose of our society right now. In 2025, 25% of older adults in the US live in an urban setting. Another 25% of adults over age 65 live in a rural community, and 50% of older adults over age 65 live in suburban communities. So if you add that up, 75% of our population over age 65 lives in suburban or rural communities. I worry about statistics like this. This is the average number of years people will spend later in their life unable to drive. So if we have this huge part of our population that's living in rural areas or suburban areas that are not well serviced by public transportation, we have a problem to solve. Because remember, I want everybody to be socially connected. I want them to be engaged with their community. I want them to be able to go places they want to go. I want them to be able to see people they want to see. But 7 years of their life, they're not going to be able to do that on their own. So there are technological solutions on the horizon for this too. However you feel about driverless cars, as scary as they might seem, this might be an incredible opportunity for older people. If we can use technology like this to help people stay engaged in their community, then it could really be a game changer in terms of helping us deal with one of these societal problems. Remember, we created those suburbs because it served a purpose for our country in 1950. Fast forward, we're a different place now. And maybe those choices and programs and policies that we put into place in 1950, they just don't fit our culture. They don't fit our population. They don't fit the aging of our society the way that they did all those years ago. You have experienced this change in our society and how our society feels about aging in your daily life, and you probably aren't even aware of it. But you can be aware of it every time you go into your local Walgreens or CVS or Target or grocery store and you buy a birthday card. Because you can learn a lot about what our society thinks about growing older by looking at the birthday cards. Those messages are very clear when you look at that birthday card section. And I pulled a couple out of my local CVS, and I'm going to share them with you to show you what I mean. Here's the first one. Don't be upset about, this is a birthday card. Don't be upset about turning 60. Lots of people are 60. Why? If you were to take all of the 60-year-olds in the world and lay them end to end, very few of them would be able to get back up under their own power. Oh, and happy birthday. Happy 60th. 60. 60. All right, here's another one. I'll read it in case you can't see it in the bag. This is the card for when guys get old. The man on the left says, my problem, when I wake up at 7, it takes me over 30 minutes to pee. The man in the middle says, my problem, well, when I wake up at 8, it takes me forever to poop. And the man on the right says, every morning I pee like a racehorse at 7, and I poop like a goose at 8. Wait for it. Oh, come on. My problem is I don't wake up till 9. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. We are bombarded by messages about what we can expect as we grow older all the time in our society. And most of those messages are not positive. Most of those messages are about decline, dysfunction, and disability, the three dreaded Ds: decline, dysfunction, and disability. I challenge you to go to find a birthday card that is not in this vein, that does not send this message about how terrible growing old is. This, I think, is a terrible situation that we've created for ourselves. And let me explain why. Part of my research focuses on ageism. And ageism is an ism like all of the other isms you've heard about. It's a set of stereotypes, how people think. It's a set of prejudices, how people feel. And it's a set of discriminatory behaviors, how people act, that are based on age. Ageism can be leveled at old people and young people. Do you have stereotypes about 20-year-olds? Are they positive stereotypes about 20-year-olds? They have stereotypes about us as well. I worry about ageism because when other people have negative stereotypes about old people, it hurts them. It limits opportunity in the workplace. It limits how people treat you in healthcare interactions. You've ever been in the doctor's office where the doctor is maybe not even talking to you, not even looking at you? Maybe you're starting to wonder, is this doctor going to take care of me because I'm 80? Like that they would take care of a 20-year-old? Ageism works its way into many aspects of our society, and it's damaging to older people when younger people have negative expectations about old people. We've also come to understand, however, that stereotypes exist within us as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've learned about the effects of self-stereotypes, stereotypes that become internalized, stereotypes that old people have about aging and therefore have about themselves. I need to take a drink because I'm going to teach you something important before I share some research with you. Okay. Two things you need to understand before I can explain this research study to you. And the first thing is that a person's walking speed is a pretty good overall indicator of their health. When you see me walking across the stage like this, it's not a perfect indicator of my health, but it's a pretty good rough one. It's different than when you see a person walking like this. Now again, not a perfect indicator, but one pretty good rough indicator. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is I'm going to teach you about a person's swing time, because a person's swing time is also a pretty good general indicator of their health. What is swing time? Swing time is the amount of time you spend when you're walking, when you have one foot on the ground and one foot off the ground. I am having a very long swing time right now. I look a little kooky, but what are you learning about my health? I've got good balance, I've got good hip strength. Well, I have okay balance, I've got okay hip strength. This is a pretty good indicator of a person's health, in contrast to a swing time that looks like this. Okay? Short swing time. Short swing time. Not a good indicator of my health. Okay? So you learned those two things. Faster walking speed, longer swing time, generally good indicator of a person's overall health. Okay. Now that you know that, here's the experiment that they did. They brought older adults into the laboratory, ostensibly to do a research study about memory and cognition. They brought older adults into the laboratory and sat them down in front of a computer. But while they brought them into the laboratory, they timed them walking down the hallway, and they measured their walking speed and their swing time. And then they sat them down in front of a computer to do the memory task. Okay? One group of older adults saw positive words about aging flashed onto that computer screen. So brief that they didn't recognize that they were there. This is a procedure we use in psychology research all the time called priming. These words get into your consciousness even though they're there so quickly. Another group of older adults saw negative words about aging. They did their memory task. The investigator said, "Thank you very much. You can go." And then they timed them walking down the hallway when they left the experiment. Okay? Yeah, clever, right? Mm-hmm. And what they discovered is that the older adults who had been exposed to positive words about aging walked faster and had a longer swing time. And older adults who'd been exposed to negative words about aging, they walked slower and had a shorter swing time. Exact same older adults, they had been exposed to different stereotypes about what it's like to be an old person. So this is powerful evidence that negative stereotypes about aging, they work their way into our consciousness. They get inside of us and they affect our behavior. They change our behavior. They may even be changing our biology. Very tantalizing research that came out several years ago that surveyed people when they were in their 50s, and they asked them about how they were feeling about growing older. And then they followed those people again 30, 40 years later. And the people who had described aging in a negative way in their 50s were more likely in their 80s to have developed Alzheimer's disease. So there is something going on in our biology. This isn't just all about psychology. This is, again, that connection between mind and body. So there are campaigns around the world right now to combat ageism, like these by the World Health Organization and other organizations here in our country. And I think these interventions and these campaigns are going to be very important. And they're important because when you have negative expectations about growing older, you're discriminating against your future self. And perhaps even more damaging when there are negative stereotypes, expectations about aging in our society, then what is the situation we have created for our children and our grandchildren? Because if they live long enough, we all want them to be old one day, right? We want everybody to be an old person. But if we've created a society when the only thing that we can expect is decline, disability, and dysfunction, then we've created an impossible bind for every generation that follows us. So I'm a professor. There is no homework today. There are no exams to take, no papers for you to work on. But I do have, I guess, some homework, is that when you go out in the world this afternoon, I want you to be vigilant about ageism. I want you to look for those messages. And when you see them, I want you to call them out. Don't buy those birthday cards. Make your own birthday card. When you stop and ask yourself, well, should I do this? You know, I'm not as young as I used to be. Do it. Fight that urge to be ageist against yourself. That's my message for today. We've got plenty of time for questions and discussion. Can you use the microphone? Sorry.
On the chart you had about life expectancy, depending on when you were born, for when it got to 2020, there was a dip. What would be the
Pandemic.
Oh, because you're born during the pandemic.
More people dying, so it lowers a lot of old people dying, lowers the
Life expectancy.
for your whole
Okay,
population.
thank you.
Yep. Yep. If you notice on those graphs, there's also a dip around 1919, the other pandemic. Yep.
In terms of Alzheimer's, if you have it in your family, do those numbers you had, like 33% will get it, 66 or whatever it was, won't? Does that affect that?
So the question is about whether you have Alzheimer's disease in your family and whether that affects those statistics. It's complicated. Let me tell you briefly what we know in terms of the science right now. The vast majority of cases of Alzheimer's disease are random. They really don't have much to do with genetics at all. Really? Somewhere around, above 90% of the cases of Alzheimer's disease are what they call sporadic. That we don't know why they happen. Some people are at greater risk because of their family history. And there are tests that can be done, genetic tests, to look at particular alleles. And there are some alleles that are protective and some that raise a person's risk. So some people have looked at that genetic information to find out whether they might be at greater risk. The problem with those tests is that they're not definitive. That even if you have the risky allele, there's no 100% certainty that you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease. Likely, as I said earlier, most of the cases are not based on those alleles. So those tests are used judiciously because they don't necessarily provide a lot of conclusive information. There is a family in Colombia that scientists are studying very carefully because everybody in their family gets Alzheimer's disease, 100%, and they usually get it young, 50s or 60s. We're trying to understand that family. We care about them a lot. We care about them because it's terrible what their family is going through, but we also think there might be something very important for us to understand at the genetic level because of that family.
I've got a quick question about the housing. I'm over here.
Oh, thank you.
I'm very concerned about housing for seniors and for elderly because I see the suburbs as being very lonely for my parents. I don't have a lot of options because our urban settings aren't really made for elderly either.
Yep.
So if you could design a program like they did after World War II,
Yeah.
what would you do? What will the government have to do? Because they're going to have to do something, because there's that time where you're not able to maintain a house, but you're not ready for the nursing home either.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that in between, I don't see it.
That's a great question about housing, and we're in a real bind, and we're behind the curve because we should have been making these changes 20 years ago. You may be aware that the municipalities around the country have been relaxing their business codes to allow for people to construct mother-in-law suites, either connected to their house or on their property. That is one indicator that, at least at the local level, people are realizing there's a need there, and we need to adjust our zoning policies to be able to accommodate what families are trying to do. I think that's one example of how things are changing. We need a lot more of innovative solutions like that. In the 1970s, there was a movement here in the United States called co-housing. It never really took off. It did in a couple of communities, but the idea was you build pods around a central building, and people would live in their pods, but they would come together in that central building for meals, social activities, community. I think you're going to see more innovations like that in the next few decades. The baby boomers are not happy with the housing options that are available right now. They've changed just about everything in our society so far as they've come through. My hope is that they will agitate for change and force entrepreneurs and governments to come up with more innovative housing solutions as well. I think you're also going to see a return to intergenerational households. There are some families now where there are 3, 4, 5 generations living in the same place. I think that's been happening in other places around the world for a long time. I think you might see some of that come back in the United States. But our families, that was a lot easier to do when it was 2 kids, 2 parents, and grandparents in intact families. Now we have people who've separated, divorced, remarried once, twice. And so family structures in the United States look different than they did 50 years ago as well. So it's going to be much more complicated to figure out the norms and the responsibilities. Am I supposed to take care of a stepfather who my mother married when she was 70? Yes, I am. I will do that. But that's just an example of how all of the expectations and norms and responsibilities, all this stuff is being rewritten in our society as we're living it.